Welcome to Complete Histories. Tonight we enter Part 2, the Middle Ages, a 1,000-year tapestry of kingdoms, trade routes, quiet monasteries, and slow transformation. Feel free to tell me where you're listening from. Get cozy, unwind, and let's step softly into this long and fascinating era. In 476 CE, the Western Roman Empire fell, the end of the classical world that had dominated civilization for over 1,000 years. But this collapse wasn't the end of human progress. It was the beginning of a transformation that would reshape the entire world. Enter the Middle Ages, where new powers would rise from Rome's ashes to create civilizations that would define human culture for centuries. This wasn't a dark age at all. This is when magnificent cathedrals soared toward heaven, scholars preserved ancient wisdom, and warriors connected distant continents for the first time. In Arabia, a merchant named Muhammad would create one of the world's great religions. In Scandinavia, Vikings would establish trade routes from Greenland to Constantinople. In Mongolia, a young boy would create the largest land empire ever seen. This is how scattered tribes became powerful empires, how local traditions gave way to universal faiths, how isolated regions became connected through trade and conquest, laying the foundation for our modern world. As the Western Roman Empire crumbled in 476 CE, Europe didn't simply descend into darkness. Instead, new powers rushed to fill the vacuum left by Rome's collapse. The stage was set for a complete transformation of European civilization. In the former Roman territories, Germanic tribes established new kingdoms with remarkable speed. The Visigoths controlled Spain, the Vandals dominated North Africa, and the Ostrogoths ruled Italy. The Saxons, Angles, and Jutes invaded Britain to form Anglo-Saxon England. The Franks settled in northern Gaul, while the Burgundians carved out their kingdom in the southeast. The Lombards would later conquer northern Italy, the Thuringians occupied central Germany, and the Alemanni formed a fierce confederation in southwestern Germany and Switzerland. But these weren't simply barbarian hordes, they were advanced political entities that blended Germanic traditions with Roman administrative practices. The most successful of these new kingdoms emerged in Gaul, in what is now France, where a Frankish chieftain named Clovis united the fractured tribes. In 496 CE, at the Battle of Tolbiac, Clovis faced the Alemanni in a struggle that would determine the future of Christianity in Western Europe. As his forces began to falter, legend tells us that Clovis called out to the Christian god for victory, promising conversion if he emerged triumphant. The tide turned dramatically. The Franks routed the Alemanni, and Clovis kept his word. His conversion to Christianity wasn't just a personal decision. It was a brilliant political move that aligned him with the Catholic Church and the Roman population of Gaul. This alliance between Germanic military power and Christian authority would define European civilization for centuries to come. Meanwhile, in the Eastern Roman Empire, now known as the Byzantine Empire, Emperor Justinian I was attempting to restore Roman greatness. From 527 to 565 CE, Justinian reconquered much of the Mediterranean, including Italy, North Africa, and parts of Spain. His greatest achievement wasn't military, however, but legal. The Corpus Juris Civilis, or Justinian's Code, systematized Roman law and became the foundation for legal systems across Europe for centuries. Justinian also commissioned the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, an architectural marvel that still stands today. Its massive dome seemed to defy gravity, leading contemporaries to believe it was suspended from heaven by a golden chain. For nearly 1,000 years, it would remain the largest cathedral in the world. But Justinian's reconquests proved unsustainable. The empire was overstretched, the treasury depleted, and new threats were emerging from the east. The stage was set for a religious revolution that would reshape the medieval world. In the harsh deserts of Arabia, in the trading city of Mecca, a merchant named Muhammad was about to change the world. Born around 570 CE into the Quraysh tribe, Muhammad earned the nickname al-Amin, the trustworthy, for his honest dealings in trade. In 610 CE, while meditating in a cave on Mount Jabal al-Nur, Muhammad experienced a vision that would alter the course of history. The angel Gabriel appeared and commanded him to recite in the name of his Lord who creates man from a clot. These became the opening verses of the Quran, Islam's holy book. Initially, Muhammad's message found few followers. His denunciation of idol worship threatened the economic foundations of Mecca, which prospered from pilgrims visiting the Kaaba shrine. Persecution forced Muhammad and his followers to flee to Medina in 622 CE, an event called the Hijra that marks the beginning of the Islamic calendar. In Medina, Muhammad proved to be not just a prophet, but a brilliant political leader. He united the warring tribes of the city and established the first Islamic community, or Ummah. When the Meccan Quraysh attacked with a massive army, Muhammad devised an ingenious defense. His followers dug a trench around Medina, making it impossible for the cavalry-dependent Meccans to breach the city's defenses. For weeks, the Quraysh laid siege to Medina, but they couldn't overcome the trench. Eventually, harsh weather and supply shortages forced them to abandon the siege. Muhammad's tactical brilliance had saved the early Muslim community. By 630 CE, Muhammad's followers had grown strong enough to march on Mecca itself. In a remarkable display of mercy, Muhammad granted amnesty to his former enemies, and most of the Meccan population converted to Islam. At the time of Muhammad's death in 632 CE, the entire Arabian Peninsula was united under the banner of Islam. What happened next stunned the medieval world. Muhammad's successors, known as caliphs, meaning successors or deputies of the Prophet, took command of this unified Arabian force. Under the first four caliphs, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali, Islamic armies exploded out of Arabia with unprecedented speed. In just a century, they conquered an empire stretching from Spain to Central Asia. The key to their success wasn't just military prowess, though their light cavalry and disciplined tactics were formidable. The real secret was their message of equality and justice. In the Byzantine and Sasanian empires, religious minorities faced persecution and heavy taxation. The Arabs offered religious tolerance and lower taxes to those who submitted peacefully. In 636 CE, at the Battle of Yarmouk, the Arab forces crushed a massive Byzantine army, opening the way to Syria and Palestine. This wasn't just any victory. The Byzantines were the Eastern Roman Empire, one of the most powerful military forces in the world at that time. Their defeat sent shockwaves across the medieval world. Jerusalem, the holy city sacred to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, surrendered to Caliph Umar in 638 CE. In a gesture that would define Islamic policy for centuries, the caliph's first act was to personally clean the Temple Mount, the site where Solomon's temple once stood, and where Muslims believe Muhammad ascended to heaven. More importantly, Umar guaranteed the safety of Christian pilgrims and allowed them to continue worshipping freely, a stark contrast to the religious persecution common in other empires. The Sasanian Empire of Persia, which had ruled from modern-day Iran to parts of Central Asia for over 400 years, proved even more vulnerable to Arab conquest. At the Battle of Qadisiyah in 636 CE, Arab forces shattered the Persian army using superior mobility and tactics. The Sasanians, who had been Rome's greatest rival and controlled the vital trade routes between East and West, collapsed completely. Within a decade, this 1,000-year-old empire had vanished forever, its territories absorbed into the rapidly expanding Islamic world. By 711 CE, Muslim armies under the Berber general Tariq ibn Ziyad had crossed the narrow Strait of Gibraltar and conquered most of Spain, defeating the Visigothic kingdom. The Berbers were the indigenous North African peoples who had converted to Islam during the Arab conquest of their lands, and they became some of the most effective soldiers in the Islamic armies. The Islamic expansion seemed unstoppable as they pushed into Francia until they finally met their match against Charles Martel and his Frankish forces at the Battle of Tours in 732 CE. The Umayyad Caliphate, which ruled from 661 to 750 CE, had made this vast expansion possible. After the assassination of Ali, the fourth caliph, Muawiyah I seized power and established the first hereditary Islamic dynasty, ruling from Damascus. The Umayyads transformed the Islamic State from a religious community into a traditional empire, with a professional army, an efficient bureaucracy, and a magnificent court culture. Under their rule, the Islamic Empire reached its greatest territorial extent, stretching from Spain to Central Asia. However, the Umayyads faced growing criticism for favoring Arab Muslims over non-Arab converts and for becoming too secular and worldly in their rule. Many felt they had abandoned the spiritual ideals of early Islam in favor of imperial luxury and power. This discontent eventually led to their downfall in 750 CE, when they were overthrown by the Abbasids, who promised to restore Islamic purity and create a more inclusive empire. Charles Martel's victory at Tours had halted Islamic expansion into Europe, but it was his grandson Charlemagne who would truly transform the continent. When Charlemagne became king of the Franks in 768 CE, Europe was a patchwork of competing kingdoms, tribal territories, and crumbling Roman remnants. Charlemagne had a vision: to restore Christian civilization and create a new Roman Empire in the West. He was a giant of a man, over 6 feet tall when the average height was 5 feet, with piercing blue eyes and a presence that commanded respect. More importantly, he was a military genius and a devout Christian who saw himself as God's instrument for spreading the faith. For 30 years, Charlemagne campaigned relentlessly. He conquered the Lombard kingdom in Italy, subdued the Saxons in Germany through decades of brutal warfare, and pushed the Islamic frontier back to the Pyrenees. By 800 CE, his empire stretched from the North Sea to the Mediterranean, from the Atlantic to the Elbe River. On Christmas Day 800 CE, in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, Pope Leo III placed a crown on Charlemagne's head and declared him Emperor of the Romans. This moment marked the birth of what would later be called the Holy Roman Empire, a new synthesis of Germanic power, Christian faith, and Roman tradition. But Charlemagne's greatest achievement wasn't military, it was cultural. By the 8th century, Western Europe had plunged into what many historians call the Dark Ages. Libraries had been destroyed, schools had closed, and much of the learning from ancient Greece and Rome was disappearing. Charlemagne recognized that a strong empire needed educated administrators, clergy, and nobles to function effectively. To combat this intellectual decline, he launched what historians call the Carolingian Renaissance, a revival of learning that saved classical knowledge from extinction. He established schools throughout his empire, standardized writing through the development of Carolingian minuscule, the basis of modern lowercase letters, and gathered scholars from across Europe to his court. The palace school at Aachen became the intellectual center of Western Europe. Scholars like Alcuin of York worked tirelessly to copy and preserve ancient texts. Without their efforts, much of our knowledge of classical literature would have been lost forever. They created a curriculum based on the 7 liberal arts: grammar, rhetoric, logic, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music, that would define European education for centuries. Unfortunately, Charlemagne's empire didn't survive his death in 814 CE. His son, Louis the Pious, lacked his father's strength, and the empire was soon racked by civil wars between Louis's 3 sons. The Treaty of Verdun in 843 CE divided the empire into 3 parts: West Francia, which is modern France, East Francia, which is modern Germany, and the Middle Kingdom, which includes modern Italy and the Low Countries. This division had profound consequences. It established the linguistic and cultural boundaries that still define Europe today, and created the political fragmentation that would characterize the medieval period. But the idea of a unified Christian Europe Charlemagne's greatest legacy, would inspire leaders for centuries to come. Just as Europe was trying to stabilize under Christian kingdoms, a new threat emerged from the north that would terrorize the continent for 3 centuries. England before the Vikings was divided into 4 major Anglo-Saxon kingdoms that had been established for centuries. Northumbria controlled the north, East Anglia ruled the east, Mercia dominated the Midlands, and Wessex held the southwest. These kingdoms had their own rulers, laws, and cultures, and while they sometimes fought each other, they were all Christian and relatively peaceful. Monasteries like Lindisfarne had become centers of learning and wealth, filled with precious manuscripts, golden treasures, and defenseless monks. On June 8, 793 CE, this peaceful world was shattered when Viking longships filled with fierce Norse warriors appeared off the coast of Lindisfarne, a holy island off the English coast. The monastery of Lindisfarne was one of Christianity's most sacred sites in England, home to beautiful manuscripts and precious treasures. The Vikings showed no mercy. They slaughtered the monks, looted the treasures, and burned the buildings. The attack sent shockwaves throughout Christian Europe. Pagan warriors had destroyed one of the holiest places in Christendom. But the Vikings weren't just mindless barbarians. They were skilled sailors, fierce warriors, and surprisingly complex traders and explorers. Their longships, with their shallow drafts and flexible construction, could navigate both open seas and shallow rivers. This gave them unprecedented mobility. They could strike anywhere and disappear before defenders could react. The Vikings came from 3 distinct Scandinavian kingdoms, Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, but their impact was felt from Greenland to Constantinople. These weren't random raiders, but skilled seafarers who used their superior longship technology to dominate the seas and rivers of medieval Europe. Danish Vikings focused primarily on England and France, where they established permanent settlements and political control. In England, they systematically conquered the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, creating the Danelaw, a vast territory covering northern and eastern England, where Danish law, customs, and language prevailed. Cities like York, which they called Jorvik, and Derby became major Viking trading centers. The Danes also repeatedly attacked France, most famously besieging Paris in 845 CE, and again in 885 to 886 CE, forcing French kings to pay massive tributes called Danegeld, literally Danish money, to buy peace. Norwegian Vikings sailed west into the Atlantic, becoming some of history's greatest explorers. They settled Iceland around 870 CE, founding Reykjavik, meaning Smoky Bay, then pushed further west to Greenland around 980 CE under Eric the Red. Most remarkably, around 1000 CE, Leif Erikson reached North America, which they called Vinland, establishing temporary settlements in what is now Newfoundland, Canada. This made them the first Europeans to reach the Americas, 500 years before Columbus. Swedish Vikings, known as Varangians, sailed east down the rivers of Russia, founding cities like Kiev and Novgorod that became major trading posts. In 882 CE, the Varangian chieftain Oleg united these settlements into the Kievan Rus, the first Russian state. From there, they continued south to Constantinople, where they traded with the Byzantine Empire, and some even served as the emperor's elite bodyguards, called the Varangian Guard. The Vikings' success stemmed from more than just their ships and weapons. European society was unprepared for their tactics. While Christian knights fought according to codes of honor, Vikings struck without warning, targeting the soft spots of civilization, monasteries, trading centers, and undefended settlements. Their raids forced European society to adapt. Kings built new fortifications, established standing armies, and developed new military tactics. The pressure of Viking attacks accelerated the development of feudalism, a political system where local lords were granted land in exchange for military service and protection. When central kings couldn't defend distant territories, local nobles took responsibility for defending their own regions, creating a network of fortified castles and warrior knights that would define medieval Europe. But the Vikings weren't invincible. By Alfred's time, the Vikings had conquered most of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, leaving Wessex as the last independent stronghold. At the Battle of Edington in 878 CE, Alfred the Great of Wessex defeated the Danish Great Army and forced their leader Guthrum to convert to Christianity. Alfred was a brilliant military innovator who created England's first navy, built a network of fortified towns called burhs, and reorganized his army to fight the mobile Viking forces. His victory marked the beginning of English resistance to Viking expansion and the start of English unification. The Viking Age gradually came to an end as Scandinavian kingdoms converted to Christianity and developed stronger central authorities. The last great Viking expedition was Harald Hardrada's invasion of England in 1066 CE, which ended in defeat at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. Ironically, this weakened the English just enough for William the Conqueror's Norman invasion to succeed, and the Normans were themselves descendants of Vikings who had settled in France. William the Conqueror's victory at the Battle of Hastings in 1066 CE transformed England forever. William, Duke of Normandy, claimed the English throne through a distant family connection and alleged promise from the previous king. His Norman army brought revolutionary changes to England. They built massive stone castles to control the population, introduced Norman French as the language of government and nobility, and established a new feudal system. The Norman conquest didn't just change who ruled England, it fundamentally altered English culture, language, and society. The Normans established a dynasty that would rule England for centuries. William's descendants included some of the most famous English kings: his son Henry I, his great-grandson Henry II, who founded the Plantagenet dynasty, and eventually kings like Richard the Lionheart and John of Magna Carta fame. The Norman influence was so profound that modern English contains thousands of French words, and England's legal and governmental systems still bear Norman fingerprints today. In a strange twist of history, the Vikings' final defeat paved the way for other descendants of Vikings to completely reshape the very kingdom they had tried so hard to conquer. While Europe experienced the fall of Rome, the rise of new kingdoms, the birth of Islam, Charlemagne's empire, and the Viking Age, an equally remarkable civilization was flourishing independently across the Atlantic. In the rainforests of Central America, the Maya classical period saw the development of cities and intellectual achievements that rivaled any in the early medieval world. Maya cities like Tikal, Palenque, and Copan became centers of learning that surpassed most European cities of their time. While Europe was struggling to preserve classical knowledge during the early medieval period, Maya astronomers were calculating the length of the solar year to 365.2420 days, more accurate than any calendar used in Europe until the modern era. They developed the concept of zero independently of Asia, created complex mathematical systems using base 20 arithmetic, and predicted eclipses centuries in advance with stunning precision. Maya society was organized around powerful city-states ruled by divine kings who commissioned magnificent pyramids, palaces, and ball courts that rivaled the greatest buildings of Byzantium or Baghdad. The Maya writing system used over 800 glyphs to record everything from royal genealogies to astronomical observations, making them the only civilization in the pre-Columbian Americas to develop a fully functional writing system. Their texts reveal a complex understanding of history, mythology, and science that parallels the intellectual achievements of the Islamic Golden Age. The Maya developed sophisticated agricultural techniques including raised fields, terracing, and advanced water management systems that supported dense urban populations in challenging tropical environments. Their cities featured complex urban planning with residential areas, ceremonial centers, and astronomical observatories that tracked celestial movements with remarkable precision. Maya art and architecture reflected their advanced understanding of mathematics and astronomy. Temples were precisely aligned with astronomical events. while intricate carvings and murals recorded history and mythological narratives in their complex hieroglyphic script. The Maya created detailed historical records that allow us to know the names and deeds of individual rulers who lived over 1,000 years ago, a level of historical documentation that rivals the best chroniclers of medieval Europe. By 1095 CE, Christian Europe had survived the Viking onslaught and was ready to take the offensive. The catalyst came from an unexpected source, a desperate plea for help from the Byzantine emperor. The Seljuk Turks, fierce Muslim warriors from Central Asia, had conquered most of Anatolia and were threatening Constantinople itself. Emperor Alexius I ruled the Byzantine Empire, the surviving eastern half of the old Roman Empire. When he became emperor in 1081 CE, his empire was collapsing. The Seljuk Turks were conquering his eastern territories, Norman warriors were attacking from the west, and various other enemies were threatening his borders. After years of fighting on multiple fronts, Alexius was desperate for help. He sent envoys to Western Europe, asking for mercenary soldiers to help him fight the Turks. Pope Urban II saw this as a golden opportunity. Urban was a skilled political leader who wanted to unite the warring kingdoms of Europe under Christianity. At the Council of Clermont in 1095 CE, he delivered one of history's most influential speeches. He declared that their brethren who lived in the East were in urgent need of help, and they must hasten to give them the aid which had often been promised. Urban called on all Christians to stop fighting each other and instead march to the Holy Land to rescue Jerusalem from Muslim control. He promised that anyone who died fighting for this cause would have all their sins forgiven and go straight to heaven. The crowd's response was electric. They supposedly cried out Deus vult, or God wills it. Urban's promise of spiritual salvation was irresistible to medieval Christians. What had started as a simple request for a few soldiers became the First Crusade, a massive military expedition that would reshape the medieval world. Over the next 2 centuries, there were at least 8 major crusades, each with its own dramatic story of triumph and tragedy. The First Crusade, from 1095 to 1099 CE, was the most successful from a Christian perspective. Thousands of European knights and commoners marched to the Holy Land, and despite enormous hardships, they captured Jerusalem in 1099 CE. The capture was brutal beyond description. Contemporary accounts tell of streets running with blood as crusaders massacred Muslims, Jews, and even Eastern Christians. The Crusaders saw themselves as God's instruments of vengeance. They established 4 Crusader states: the County of Edessa, the Principality of Antioch, the County of Tripoli, and the Kingdom of Jerusalem. These became Latin outposts in a Muslim world, sustained by constant reinforcement from Europe and the military orders: the Knights Templar, the Hospitallers, and the Teutonic Knights. But Muslim resistance was building. In 1144 CE, the great Muslim leader Nur ad-Din recaptured Edessa, triggering the Second Crusade from 1147 to 1149 CE. This expedition, led by Holy Roman Emperor Conrad III and King Louis VII of France, ended in disaster. The Crusader army was virtually annihilated in Anatolia, and the survivors achieved nothing. The Muslim response reached its climax under Saladin, also known as Salah ad-Din, the Kurdish-born Sultan of Egypt and Syria. In 1187 CE, at the Battle of Hattin, Saladin's forces crushed the Crusader army in the blazing heat of the Galilee Hills. King Guy of Jerusalem was captured, and the True Cross, Christianity's most sacred relic, was lost forever. Within months, Saladin had recaptured Jerusalem, treating his Christian prisoners with the mercy that had been denied to Muslims in 1099. The Third Crusade, from 1189 to 1192 CE, brought together the 3 most powerful rulers in Christendom: Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa, King Philip Augustus of France, and King Richard the Lionheart of England all marched to the Holy Land. But even this coalition couldn't retake Jerusalem. Frederick drowned while crossing a river in Anatolia, Philip returned to France after capturing Acre, and Richard, despite his military genius, could only secure a truce with Saladin that allowed Christian pilgrims access to the holy sites. The Fourth Crusade, from 1202 to 1204 CE, was a complete disaster that never even reached the Holy Land. The Crusaders couldn't pay for their ships, so they agreed to attack Constantinople instead. They sacked the Byzantine capital, the greatest Christian city in the world, stealing its treasures and destroying countless works of art. This catastrophic event fatally weakened the Byzantine Empire and created permanent hatred between Eastern Orthodox and Western Catholic Christianity. The remaining four Crusades, the 5th through 8th from 1217 to 1270 CE, achieved even less. The Children's Crusade of 1212 CE saw thousands of young people march toward the Holy Land, only to be sold into slavery or die of disease. The last Crusader stronghold, Acre, fell to the Muslims in 1291 CE, ending 2 centuries of Crusader presence in the Holy Land. While European knights were fighting in the Holy Land, Christian Europe was also reaching new heights of artistic and intellectual achievement at home. The 12th and 13th centuries marked the pinnacle of medieval civilization, an age when soaring cathedrals and sophisticated theology expressed humanity's highest aspirations. The revolution began in architecture. Around 1140 CE, Abbot Suger of Saint-Denis, a monastery near Paris, France, introduced revolutionary building techniques that would transform European skylines forever. The pointed arch, the flying buttress, and ribbed vaulting allowed builders to construct churches of unprecedented height and lightness. These Gothic cathedrals were more than buildings. They were theology in stone. Every element had symbolic meaning. The vertical emphasis pointed toward heaven. The light flooding through stained glass windows represented divine illumination, and the sculptural programs told the entire Christian story from creation to Judgment Day. Chartres Cathedral, begun in 1194 CE, exemplified Gothic perfection. Its soaring nave, magnificent rose windows, and hundreds of sculpted figures created a total work of art that educated illiterate peasants and inspired learned scholars alike. The cathedral took decades to complete, requiring the labor of entire communities united in devotion to God. The intellectual revolution was equally remarkable. Cathedral schools evolved into universities, Bologna in 1088, Paris in 1150, Oxford in 1167, and Cambridge in 1209. That became centers of learning throughout Europe. These institutions developed a new method of inquiry called Scholasticism, which sought to reconcile classical philosophy with Christian theology. The greatest scholastic thinker was Thomas Aquinas, who lived from 1225 to 1274 CE. His Summa Theologica became the definitive statement of Catholic doctrine. Aquinas used Aristotelian logic to demonstrate that reason and faith were compatible, that the existence of God could be proven through rational argument, and that the natural world revealed divine purpose. He and other medieval thinkers had successfully combined ancient Greek philosophy with Christian teaching to create a complete explanation of reality. This gave European civilization extraordinary confidence. Medieval people believed they had figured out how everything in the universe worked, from why the planets moved in their orbits to what happened to the human soul after death. For the first time in centuries, Europe felt it had all the answers. The Gothic cathedrals expressed this confidence in stone, reaching toward heaven with an optimism that would be shattered by the catastrophes of the 14th century. While European crusaders were attempting to conquer the Holy Land, the Islamic world was experiencing its own golden age of learning and culture. From Spain to Central Asia, Muslim scholars, scientists, and philosophers were pushing the boundaries of human knowledge in ways that would ultimately surpass European achievements. The Abbasid Caliphate, which ruled from Baghdad from 750 to 1258 CE, was the driving force behind this intellectual revolution. The Abbasids came to power by overthrowing the Umayyad Caliphate, the first hereditary Islamic dynasty that had ruled from Damascus from 661 to 750 CE. The Umayyads were criticized for favoring Arab Muslims over non-Arab converts and for becoming too secular and worldly in their rule. The Abbasids represented a shift from Arab dominance to a more inclusive Islamic empire that welcomed Persian, Turkish, and other non-Arab Muslims into positions of power. They moved the capital from Damascus to Baghdad, which they founded in 762 CE as a round city designed to be the center of the Islamic world. Under Abbasid rule, the Islamic Empire reached its cultural and intellectual zenith. The caliphs actively promoted learning and translation, seeing themselves as patrons of knowledge rather than merely military leaders. Caliph Harun al-Rashid, who ruled from 786 to 809 CE, was famous from the Arabian Nights stories. He established the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, a library and research center that attracted scholars from around the world. This institution became the greatest center of learning since the Library of Alexandria, where Christian, Jewish, Muslim, and pagan scholars worked together to preserve and expand human knowledge. The Abbasids created a cosmopolitan civilization that stretched from Spain to Central Asia, united by Arabic as the language of scholarship and administration. Alongside the Baghdad-based Abbasids, a rival Fatimid Caliphate, which ruled from 909 to 1171 CE, rose in North Africa and, after seizing Egypt in 969, founded Cairo as its glittering capital. Claiming descent from the Prophet's daughter Fatima, the Fatimids, followers of Ismaili Shia Islam, built an empire that ran from the Atlantic to Syria. They turned Cairo into the key crossroads between Mediterranean and Indian Ocean trade and created Al-Azhar Mosque University, soon matching Baghdad's House of Wisdom in reputation. Their mints struck a high-purity gold dinar that became the preferred currency of Mediterranean commerce, and their court welcomed Christian, Jewish, and Muslim officials alike. Though later replaced by the Sunni Ayyubids, the Fatimids stamped an enduring imprint on Cairo's skyline, Islamic law, and the circulation of knowledge and wealth. Meanwhile, back in Abbasid Baghdad, the House of Wisdom was more than a library. It was a translation workshop where Greek, Persian, and Indian masterpieces were rendered into Arabic. Works by Aristotle, Plato, Ptolemy, and Galen were preserved, critiqued, and expanded by Muslim scholars. Without their efforts, much of classical learning would have vanished. Muslim scholars didn't just preserve ancient learning, they revolutionized it. The Islamic Golden Age produced brilliant minds across every field of knowledge. In mathematics, Al-Khwarizmi popularized Hindu-Arabic numerals, including 0, throughout the Islamic world. His mathematical treatise gave us the word algebra from the Arabic al-jabr, meaning reunion of broken parts. When his works were translated into Latin in the 12th century, they introduced these revolutionary mathematical concepts to Europe. The Latinized version of his name eventually became our modern word algorithm. In medicine, Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna, wrote the Canon of Medicine, a comprehensive medical encyclopedia that remained the standard textbook in Europe for centuries. Muslim physicians performed cataract surgery, developed anesthetics, and established the first hospitals with medical schools. In philosophy, Ibn Rushd, known as Averroes, wrote commentaries on Aristotle that profoundly influenced European scholasticism. His work helped preserve and transmit Greek philosophy to the West. In history, Ibn Khaldun developed what might be called the first scientific approach to history, analyzing the rise and fall of civilizations through economic and social factors rather than divine intervention or the actions of great men. Beyond scholarship, the Islamic world also produced magnificent architecture that still takes your breath away today. The great Mosque of Cordoba, with its mesmerizing forest of red and white horseshoe arches, showcased the engineering mastery of Al-Andalus. The gleaming dome of the Rock in Jerusalem and the intricate palaces of the Alhambra in Granada displayed Islamic artistic genius at its peak. This golden age began to decline in the 11th and 12th centuries due to political fragmentation, the Crusades, and the rise of more conservative religious movements that discouraged scientific inquiry. The final blow came in 1258 CE when Mongol forces under Hulagu Khan stormed Baghdad. The Abbasid Caliph al-Mustasim had foolishly rejected Mongol demands for submission and executed Mongol envoys, a fatal mistake when dealing with an empire that viewed any resistance as an unforgivable insult. The destruction was catastrophic. The Mongols burned the House of Wisdom, throwing countless irreplaceable manuscripts into the Tigris River. Scholars were massacred, libraries destroyed, and the canals that sustained the city were ruined. It's said that the Tigris ran black with ink from the destroyed books and red with the blood of scholars. The Mongols showed no mercy because they viewed Baghdad's resistance as defiance of their divine mandate to rule the world. The Mongol destruction of Baghdad marked a symbolic end to the Abbasid Golden Age, though Islamic civilization continued to flourish in other centers like Cairo, Cordoba, and Delhi. But the loss of Baghdad was more than just the fall of a city. It was the end of an era when the Islamic world had been humanity's greatest center of learning and discovery. While land-based empires dominated much of Asia, the seas and islands of Southeast Asia were home to advanced maritime civilizations that controlled crucial trade routes and built some of the world's most impressive monuments. These empires demonstrated that naval power and commercial networks could create wealth and influence rivaling any terrestrial kingdom. The Khmer Empire, ruling from Angkor in modern Cambodia, built the largest religious complex in the world. Angkor Wat, completed in the early 12th century CE, covered an area larger than modern Paris and housed over 1 million people through advanced hydraulic engineering. The Khmer developed extensive water management systems, including canals, reservoirs, and irrigation networks that transformed the Cambodian landscape into a productive agricultural powerhouse. The temple complex at Angkor represented more than religious devotion. It was a statement of imperial power and technological mastery. The precise astronomical alignments, intricate bas-reliefs depicting Hindu epics, and massive stone construction required coordinated labor from across the empire. The Khmer kings portrayed themselves as divine rulers whose temples connected the earthly and celestial realms. The Srivijaya Empire controlled the crucial Strait of Malacca from the 7th to the 13th centuries CE, becoming one of history's great maritime trading powers. From their base in Sumatra, they controlled the spice trade between China and India, accumulating wealth that rivaled European kingdoms. The empire's naval technology and commercial networks connected the Pacific and Indian Ocean economies centuries before European expansion. Srivijaya's power rested on their mastery of monsoon navigation, their ability to construct and maintain fleets of trading vessels, and their diplomatic skills in managing relationships with both Chinese and Indian trading partners. The empire established trading posts throughout the Indonesian archipelago and the Malay Peninsula, creating a commercial network that facilitated the exchange of goods, ideas, and technologies across maritime Southeast Asia. While Southeast Asian maritime empires controlled the seas, the greatest land-based empire in history was emerging from the steppes of Mongolia, destined to conquer and connect vast territories from Korea to Eastern Europe. Around 1162 CE, a boy was born clutching a blood clot in his right hand, a sign, according to Mongol tradition, that he was destined to be a great leader. His name was Temujin, but history would know him as Genghis Khan. Temujin's childhood was marked by hardship and betrayal. When he was 9, his father was poisoned by an enemy tribe, and his family was abandoned to starve on the steppes. But adversity forged him into a leader of extraordinary cunning and ruthlessness. By his 20s, he was uniting the fractious Mongol tribes through a combination of charisma, strategic marriages, and merciless elimination of rivals. In 1206 CE, at a great assembly called a Kurultai, Temujin was proclaimed Genghis Khan, universal ruler of all the Mongols. He had unified nearly 1 million people under his leadership, creating the largest cavalry force the world had ever seen. Genghis Khan's military innovations were revolutionary. He organized his army in decimal units, tens, hundreds, thousands, and tumans, which were units of 10,000 soldiers, that could operate independently but coordinate perfectly. His warriors were trained from childhood to ride and shoot, capable of firing arrows with deadly accuracy at full gallop. Most importantly, they were utterly loyal to their Khan and completely ruthless towards their enemies. The Mongols used psychological warfare as effectively as their bows and horses. They deliberately spread terror, using captives as human shields and leaving pyramids of skulls to discourage resistance. Entire regions were depopulated, and some areas didn't recover for centuries. The Mongols' first target was the Western Xia Kingdom in 1209 CE. The campaign was a massacre. Cities that surrendered were spared. Those that resisted were obliterated. Next came the Jin dynasty in northern China. From 1211 to 1234 CE, the Mongols systematically destroyed Chinese civilization north of the Yellow River. Beijing was captured and burned in 1215 CE. Millions died, either in battle or from the famine and disease that followed the Mongol invasions. But Genghis Khan's greatest campaign was against the Khwarezmian Empire in Central Asia and Persia. When the Khwarezm Shah murdered Mongol envoys in 1219 CE, he sealed his empire's doom. The Mongol response was swift and terrible. Cities like Bukhara, Samarkand, and Urgench were reduced to rubble. Skilled craftsmen were enslaved and sent to Mongolia. The rest of the population was slaughtered. When Genghis Khan died in 1227 CE, his empire stretched from Korea to the Caspian Sea. But his sons and grandsons continued the expansion. Under Ögedei Khan, Mongol armies invaded Europe, crushing Polish and Hungarian forces and threatening Vienna itself. Under Mungke and Kublai Khan, they completed the conquest of China and established the Yuan dynasty. Kublai Khan was perhaps the most important Mongol ruler after Genghis Khan himself. In 1271, Kublai established the Yuan dynasty and formally claimed orthodox succession from prior Chinese dynasties, and by 1279 he became the first non-Han emperor to rule all of China proper. Unlike his predecessors who remained nomadic warriors, Kublai embraced Chinese culture and governance. He established his capital at Beijing, created a Chinese-style government with Confucian ministers, and adopted Chinese imperial traditions while maintaining his Mongol identity. Kublai Khan was known as a keen supporter of literature. He himself favored Buddhism, but he permitted all religions to be practiced, making his court a cosmopolitan center of learning and culture. Under Kublai Khan's rule, the Mongol Empire reached its zenith. At its peak around 1279 CE, it was the largest contiguous land empire in history, spanning from Eastern Europe to the Pacific Ocean. This vast empire facilitated trade along the Silk Road, promoted religious tolerance, and enabled unprecedented cultural exchange between East and West. It was during this golden age that Marco Polo, the famous Venetian merchant, traveled to China and served Kublai Khan between 1275 and 1292 CE. Kublai trusted foreigners more than his Chinese subjects and used Marco as a personal emissary on fact-finding missions throughout his vast empire. The Khan sent Marco to distant provinces including Yunnan, southeastern China, and possibly Myanmar, giving him unprecedented access to the inner workings of the Mongol Empire. When Marco finally returned to Venice and was imprisoned during a war with Genoa, he dictated his incredible stories to a fellow prisoner who wrote them down. The book gave Europeans their first comprehensive look into China, describing wonders like paper money, coal, and the Khan's magnificent court that seemed almost too fantastic to believe. Marco became the bridge between two worlds. The medieval European mind could barely comprehend the advanced civilization he described in the East. The Silk Road that Marco traveled flourished under Mongol protection. This network of trade routes connected East and West, stretching from China to the Mediterranean. Under Mongol rule, these routes became safer and more efficient than ever before. The Mongol Empire's vast size made exploration by traders and travelers possible, with people, goods, and ideas flowing freely between Europe, the Middle East, Central Asia, and China. Merchants could transport silk, spices, precious stones, and other luxury goods across thousands of miles, while also carrying new technologies, religions, and cultural practices. The Mongols actively protected these trade routes, making long-distance commerce more profitable and secure than it had been for centuries. Yet this remarkable empire was built on a foundation of unparalleled destruction. Some historians estimate that the Mongol conquests reduced the global population by as much as 11%. While Mongol horsemen conquered vast land empires, Polynesian navigators were achieving an even more remarkable feat. They settled islands scattered across 10 million square miles of Pacific Ocean, an area larger than all the continents combined. Using double-hulled voyaging canoes and extraordinary navigation skills, they accomplished the greatest maritime expansion in human history. Polynesian navigators developed techniques that wouldn't be matched by any other civilization. They read ocean swells, cloud formations, and bird flight patterns to navigate across thousands of miles of open ocean with pinpoint accuracy. Master navigators memorized the positions of over 200 stars and could determine their location by feeling wave patterns against their canoe hulls. These skills were passed down through generations of expert navigators who could guide their vessels across seemingly empty ocean to tiny islands beyond the horizon. The Great Age of Polynesian expansion reached its climax during the High Medieval period. Around 1000 CE, Polynesian voyagers reached Easter Island, also called Rapa Nui, the most isolated inhabited land on Earth. This journey required crossing over 2,000 miles of open ocean from the nearest inhabited island, demonstrating navigational skills that would not be equaled until the development of modern instruments. Between 1000 and 1300 CE, they discovered and settled the Hawaiian Islands, creating a sophisticated society in one of the world's most remote locations. The Hawaiian archipelago became home to complex chiefdoms that developed unique agricultural systems, social hierarchies, and religious practices adapted to their isolated island environment. Around 1200 to 1300 CE, Polynesian explorers became the last people to discover an uninhabited continent when they reached New Zealand, which they called Aotearoa. The settlement of New Zealand represented the final chapter in humanity's colonization of habitable lands, completing a process that had begun when early humans first left Africa hundreds of thousands of years earlier. These achievements required not just navigational genius, but also remarkable social organization. Polynesian societies developed the technology, knowledge systems, and cultural practices necessary to sustain multi-generational ocean voyages and establish thriving communities on previously uninhabited islands. Their double-hulled voyaging canoes could carry families, livestock, and supplies needed to establish new settlements, while their social systems enabled coordinated expeditions that could last for weeks crossing the open ocean. The Polynesian expansion across the Pacific represents one of humanity's greatest triumphs over geographical barriers, demonstrating that human ingenuity and determination could overcome even the vast distances of the world's largest ocean. While Europe, Asia, and the Pacific witnessed remarkable civilizations, Africa was home to its own refined societies that maintained unique cultural traditions while participating actively in global trade networks. From the highlands of Ethiopia to the coastal cities of East Africa, African civilizations developed advanced political systems and architectural achievements that flourished across the continent. While Europe was converting to Christianity, the Kingdom of Aksum in modern-day Ethiopia became one of the world's great Christian civilizations. Ethiopian Christianity developed unique traditions, including the remarkable rock-hewn churches of Lalibela, carved directly into solid volcanic rock in the 12th century CE. These architectural marvels rivaled European cathedral builders, with entire churches carved downward into the living rock, complete with windows, doors, and intricate decorative elements. Ethiopia successfully resisted Islamic expansion while maintaining trade connections with both Christian Europe and the Islamic world. The kingdom controlled Red Sea trade routes and developed its own written script, Ge'ez, which remains in use today. Ethiopian emperors claimed descent from King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, creating a powerful legitimizing mythology that helped maintain independence for over 1,500 years. This Christian kingdom in the heart of Africa preserved ancient traditions while adapting to changing political and religious circumstances across the medieval period. Along Africa's eastern coast, a remarkable urban civilization flourished through Indian Ocean trade. The Swahili city-states, including Kilwa, Mombasa, and Mogadishu, became wealthy trading centers that connected Africa to Asia through networks of dhow sailing ships. These cities developed advanced maritime technologies and commercial practices that enabled them to compete successfully with trading powers across the Indian Ocean. These cities developed a unique culture, blending African, Arab, and Persian influences. The Swahili language emerged as a lingua franca for trade, while Islam provided a unifying religious framework that connected East African Muslims to the broader Islamic world. Kilwa became so wealthy from controlling the gold trade from Zimbabwe that its coins were accepted as currency throughout the Indian Ocean, demonstrating the reach and influence of African commercial networks. The Great Mosque of Kilwa, built with coral stone, exemplified Swahili architectural achievement. These African cities were integral participants in global trade networks, not isolated peripheries, and their merchants sailed regularly to India, Persia, and China. The prosperity of the Swahili coast proved that Africa was fully integrated into medieval global trade systems, with African merchants and rulers playing active roles in international commerce and diplomacy. This completes our survey of the high medieval period. Across every inhabited continent, sophisticated civilizations flourished simultaneously, connected by trade networks, religious exchanges, and cultural contacts. Together, they created the first truly global system of human interaction. The 14th century began with Europe at the height of medieval civilization. Gothic cathedrals soared toward heaven, universities flourished, and trade connected distant regions in unprecedented networks of commerce. But this golden age was about to be shattered by a catastrophe so severe that it would transform European society forever. In 1347 CE, Genoese trading ships arrived in Sicily carrying more than silk and spices. They brought death itself. The Black Death, or bubonic plague, had traveled the Silk Road from Central Asia, spread by fleas on black rats that infested merchant vessels. The very trade networks that had brought Europe prosperity now became highways of death, allowing disease to move at the speed of commerce rather than natural migration. The Mongol Empire's Pax Mongolica had created safer, more efficient routes spanning from China to Europe, while advances in maritime technology allowed ships to travel faster and carry larger cargoes, including more infected rats. What might have taken decades to spread naturally now took mere months. The plague exploited every caravan stop and trading port, moving from the steppes of Central Asia through Constantinople's bustling markets to Venice's crowded docks. Ships departing from Crimean ports could reach European cities in weeks, immediately introducing the pathogen to densely populated urban centers. The Italian poet Giovanni Boccaccio witnessed the horror firsthand. He described how at the beginning of the malady, certain swellings either on the groin or under the armpits grew to the size of a common apple, others to the size of an egg, and these the common people named plague boils. Within months, it had reached every corner of Europe. Entire villages were abandoned, cities lost half their populations, and social institutions collapsed. Priests fled their parishes, physicians died treating patients, and trade ground to a halt. Between 1347 and 1351 CE, The Black Death killed an estimated 75 to 200 million people, roughly 1/3 of Europe's population. Some regions lost up to 60% of their inhabitants. But the Black Death did more than kill. It transformed society. With so many peasants dead, survivors could demand higher wages and better working conditions. The rigid social hierarchy of feudalism began to crack as labor became scarce and valuable. This led to social upheavals across Europe. In England, the Peasants' Revolt of 1381 CE saw thousands of workers march on London, demanding an end to serfdom. Serfdom was the system that bound peasants to their lord's land, requiring them to work his fields without wages and seek permission to marry, move, or even leave the estate. Though the revolt was crushed, it marked the beginning of the end for feudalism in Western Europe. The plague also shattered medieval Christianity's confident world-view. The Church's teachings about divine justice and mercy seemed inadequate in the face of such immense suffering. Some turned to extreme religious practices, like whipping themselves bloody to atone for humanity's sins. Others questioned the Church's authority altogether. As Europe struggled with plague and social upheaval, two of its greatest powers were locked in a devastating conflict that would last over a century. The 100 Years' War between England and France began with a dynastic dispute, but evolved into a struggle for national identity. The conflict's origins lay in the complex feudal relationships between the English and French crowns. When the last direct male heir of the Capetian dynasty died in 1328 CE, Edward III of England claimed the French throne through his mother's lineage. The French rejected this claim, preferring Philip VI of the Valois branch. The war began in earnest when Edward III invaded France in 1337 CE. English longbowmen, drawn from the yeoman class, free farmers who owned small plots of land, revolutionized medieval warfare. These skilled hunters were accustomed to using bows for both hunting and local defense. At the Battle of Crécy in 1346 CE, English archers destroyed the flower of French nobility, proving that common soldiers with superior weapons could defeat mounted knights. The war's most dramatic moment came with Joan of Arc, a peasant girl who claimed to receive visions from Saints Michael, Margaret, and Catherine. In 1429 CE, at age 17, she convinced the Dauphin, the future Charles VII, to let her lead a relief force to the besieged city of Orléans. Joan's arrival transformed French morale. Dressed in white armor and carrying a banner depicting Christ, she inspired the French forces to break the English siege. Her subsequent victories led to Charles VII's coronation at Reims, fulfilling her divine mission. But Joan's success made her enemies in both camps. Captured by Burgundian allies of the English in 1430 CE, she was sold to the English and put on trial for heresy and witchcraft. Despite her eloquent defense, she was condemned and burned at the stake on May 30th, 1431 CE. She was just 19 years old. Joan's martyrdom only strengthened French resolve. Under Charles VII, the French gradually reconquered their territory. The war finally ended in 1453 CE with the Battle of Castillon, where French cannons shattered the last English army in France. England retained only Calais of its vast continental empire. While Christian Europe was racked by plague and warfare, a new Islamic empire was rising that would dominate the eastern Mediterranean for centuries. The Ottoman Empire began as a small beylik, or principality, in northwestern Anatolia, founded around 1299 CE by Osman I, a Turkish tribal leader who gave his name to the Ottoman dynasty. The Ottomans succeeded where others failed because they created a unique synthesis of Islamic law, Byzantine administration, and Turkish military tradition. They welcomed converts from all backgrounds, creating a meritocratic system where talent mattered more than birth. The key to Ottoman success was the Janissary Corps, an elite infantry force recruited through the Devshirme system. Christian boys from the Balkans were taken as tribute, converted to Islam, and trained as soldiers completely loyal to the Sultan. These slave soldiers became the backbone of Ottoman military power. Under Murad I, who ruled from 1362 to 1389 CE, Osman's great-grandson and the third Ottoman Sultan, the Ottomans crossed into Europe and began conquering the Balkans. The Battle of Kosovo in 1389 CE, though tactically inconclusive, established Ottoman dominance over Serbia and became a legendary moment in both Turkish and Serbian national memory. The Ottomans' greatest prize was Constantinople, the last remnant of the Byzantine Empire. When Mehmed II, known as Mehmed the Conqueror, became Sultan in 1451 CE at just 19 years old, he was determined to capture the city that had resisted Muslim siege for 8 centuries. The son of Murad II, Mehmed represented the continuation of Ottoman expansion into Europe. Mehmed's siege of Constantinople in 1453 CE was a masterpiece of military engineering. He built the massive Rumeli Hisar fortress to control the Bosphorus, cast enormous cannons capable of battering down the city's ancient walls, and even transported ships overland to bypass the harbor chain. On May 29, 1453 CE, after a siege lasting 2 months, Ottoman forces breached the walls of Constantinople. Emperor Constantine XI died fighting on the walls, sword in hand, as the Byzantine Empire fell after more than 1,000 years. With this conquest, the last remnant of the Roman Empire finally met its end. This was the empire that had ruled the Mediterranean world, created the foundations of Western law and government, spread Christianity across Europe, and preserved Greek learning through the Dark Ages. It marked one of history's most momentous transitions. The fall of Constantinople sent shockwaves throughout Christian Europe. The city was renamed Istanbul and became the capital of an empire that would soon stretch from Algeria to the Persian Gulf, from Hungary to Yemen. Meanwhile, sophisticated civilizations were flourishing across North America. The Mississippian culture, centered around the city of Cahokia near present-day St. Louis, created North America's largest pre-Columbian settlement. At its peak around 1100 CE, Cahokia housed 15,000 to 20,000 people, making it larger than London at the time. Cahokia was built around Monk's Mound, a massive earthen pyramid covering 14 acres at its base, larger than the Great Pyramid of Giza. The city featured sophisticated urban planning with residential neighborhoods, ceremonial plazas, and astronomical observatories. Cahokian influence extended throughout the Mississippi River Valley through trade networks that brought copper from the Great Lakes, shells from the Gulf Coast, and exotic materials from across the continent. Along the Pacific Northwest coast, societies like the Haida, Tlingit, and Chinook developed complex cultures based on the region's abundant salmon runs and forest resources. These societies created intricate art, elaborate ceremonial houses, and the famous potlatch ceremonies where chiefs demonstrated their wealth by giving away vast quantities of goods. Northwest coast societies developed advanced woodworking techniques, creating massive cedar houses and intricately carved totem poles that recorded family histories and spiritual beliefs. These North American civilizations developed complex political systems, trade networks, and cultural achievements that rivaled societies anywhere in the world. They demonstrate that sophisticated urban centers and complex societies were flourishing across the Americas long before European contact, challenging any notion that advanced civilization was limited to the Old World. Two of history's most remarkable civilizations were flourishing in the Americas, completely isolated from Europe, Asia, and Africa. The Aztec Empire dominated the highlands of Mexico from their island capital of Tenochtitlan, while the Inca Empire stretched across the Andes Mountains of South America, ruling from the sacred city of Cusco. In the Valley of Mexico, Aztec legend tells of a divine prophecy. Their god Huitzilopochtli would guide them to a promised land, marked by an eagle perched on a cactus, eating a snake. In 1345 CE, the Aztecs found this sign on an island in Lake Texcoco and founded their capital, Tenochtitlan. Within 2 centuries, Tenochtitlan had become one of the world's largest cities, with over 200,000 inhabitants. Built on artificial islands connected by causeways and canals, it was an engineering marvel that amazed even the Spanish conquistadors who would later destroy it. The Aztec Empire, or Triple Alliance, controlled much of central Mexico through an intricate system of tribute and military intimidation. Conquered peoples were required to provide goods, services, and sacrificial victims to feed the Aztec war machine and religious ceremonies. Aztec religion was dominated by the need to nourish the gods with human blood to ensure the continuation of the world. The great temple of Tenochtitlan, with its twin pyramids dedicated to Huitzilopochtli and the rain god Tlaloc, was the site of massive sacrificial ceremonies. During the temple's dedication in 1487 CE, thousands of captives were reportedly sacrificed over 4 days. Meanwhile, in the Andes Mountains of South America, the Inca Empire was creating an even more impressive civilization. From their capital at Cusco, the Incas ruled the largest empire in pre-Columbian America, stretching over 2,500 miles from modern-day Ecuador to Chile. The Incas achieved this vast empire without writing, the wheel, or iron tools. Instead, they relied on an extraordinary administrative system based on the quipu, knotted strings that recorded complex information about population, tribute, and resources. Their road system, spanning over 25,000 miles of mountain terrain, enabled rapid communication and troop movement across impossible geography. Inca architecture was equally remarkable. At Machu Picchu, built around 1450 CE, massive stone blocks were fitted together so precisely that not even a knife blade could slip between them. The city, perched on a mountain ridge 8,000 feet above sea level, demonstrated the Incas' mastery of engineering and their spiritual connection to the landscape. Inca society was rigidly hierarchical, but remarkably efficient. The emperor, believed to be a direct descendant of the sun god Inti, ruled through a bureaucracy that managed every aspect of life. The mita system required citizens to contribute labor to state projects, building the roads, temples, and agricultural terraces that sustained the empire. The Incas developed advanced agricultural techniques, creating terraced farms on steep mountain slopes and complex irrigation systems that transformed the harsh Andean environment into productive farmland. They cultivated over 3,000 varieties of potatoes and developed freeze-drying techniques to preserve food for years. Both the Aztec and Inca empires were at their peak around 1500 CE, controlling millions of subjects and commanding vast wealth. They had no knowledge that across the Atlantic, European explorers were already planning voyages that would bring these two worlds into catastrophic collision. The stage was set for one of history's most dramatic encounters between civilizations. While Europe struggled with plague and warfare, remarkable empires were flourishing in West Africa, built on the wealth of gold and the strategic control of trans-Saharan trade routes that connected the continent to the Mediterranean world. Before the 13th century, West Africa was divided into numerous small kingdoms and city-states that often fought each other for control of gold mines and trading posts. The Mali Empire emerged around 1235 CE, when a warrior prince named Sundiata Keita conquered and united these fragmented kingdoms into a single powerful state. Mali's strength came from controlling two of medieval Africa's most precious resources: gold mines in the south and salt deposits in the northern Sahara. Salt was as valuable as gold in tropical Africa, where it was essential for preserving food and maintaining health in the hot climate. Mali's most famous ruler was Mansa Musa, Sundiata's grandnephew who became emperor around 1312 CE. Mansa was the royal title meaning King of Kings, similar to how Europeans used emperor. Musa became possibly the richest man in history through Mali's control of West Africa's gold mines. Islam had spread to the region through peaceful trade with North African merchants, and as a devout Muslim, Musa embarked on a pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324, a religious journey to Islam's holiest city. His caravan included 60,000 people and 80 camels carrying gold. Along the way, Mansa Musa gave away so much wealth in Cairo and other cities that he caused massive inflation that lasted for a decade. This wasn't just showing off. Mansa Musa was conducting diplomacy and advertising Mali's riches to potential partners. His journey was so famous that European mapmakers began drawing Mali on their world maps, often depicting Mansa Musa holding a golden orb. Back home, Mansa Musa transformed the city of Timbuktu into one of the world's great centers of learning. The University of Sankore attracted scholars from across the Islamic world, and its libraries held hundreds of thousands of manuscripts covering everything from astronomy to poetry. By the late 1400s, a new power emerged to challenge Mali's dominance. The Songhai Empire, originally a small kingdom that had been part of Mali, broke free and began expanding under ambitious rulers. It grew to become the largest empire in African history, bigger than all of Western Europe. From their capital at Gao, the Songhai rulers controlled the Niger River with fleets of war canoes and dominated the desert routes with cavalry forces. These West African empires proved that medieval wealth and sophistication extended far beyond Europe and Asia. Through their mastery of gold, salt, and commerce, they created some of the world's richest cities and most advanced civilizations. By 1500 CE, the medieval world was drawing to a close, transformed by 1,000 years of dramatic change, cultural exchange, and human achievement. The isolated regions that had emerged from Rome's collapse had become interconnected through trade, conquest, and the spread of universal religions. Universal faiths like Christianity and Islam had replaced tribal loyalties, creating new forms of civilization that transcended ethnic and linguistic boundaries. The medieval world of feudal hierarchies and religious unity was giving way to an early modern world of competitive nation-states, religious pluralism, and intellectual revolution. Join us in the next video as we witness the birth of the modern world through exploration, scientific revolution, and the democratic ideals that continue to shape our global civilization today.